The Tampa Bay Buccaneers win ugly, but a win is a win, and Mike Evans is the GOAT. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this live post-game reaction episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And as always, we want to share our appreciation for your continued support of the show. Right now, you can join the Locked On Bucs Insiders, where you get the news, the inside scoop, and exclusive content delivered directly to your phone, plus one-on-one conversations with me via text message. I loved talking to all the insiders during the game today, and you can be one of those insiders. Just go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to sign up. On this episode, we are going to talk about my likes. We're going to talk about my dislikes. We're going to hand out game balls. But first, we are going to start things off as we usually do with our biggest moments of the game. And this one is easy. Mike Evans' 75-yard touchdown. Like, that was the spark that really got things going for the Buccaneers. So the Panthers had just taken a 10-7 lead on a Chuba Hubbard touchdown run, and the offense had been atrocious all day. There was no signs of that stopping. They had scored a touchdown on their second drive, and since then, this is what occurred. 3 and out, 6 plays that ended in an interception, 4 plays that ended in a punt, halftime. 3 and out. The defense allows a 7-play, 65-yard touchdown drive for Carolina. And on the Bucs' very first play following that touchdown, Mike Evans catches a good pass from Baker Mayfield after a beautiful cut that got him some space. And then he turned on the Jets. With a defender closing in, he lays out, dives past the pylon, and the referees rule him down at the 1-yard line. But after review, it was overturned. It was ruled a touchdown, and the Buccaneers immediately go back up 14-10. It was a huge spark for the team. The defense had been playing their butts off without Levante David, without Devin White, without Servassier Dennis. They lost KJ Britt, who was carted off during the game. They were using Ryan Neal and Kayvon Merriweather as inside linebackers. And after that play by Mike Evans, the Bucs never trailed again, although it was a little bit closer than one would have liked. Some other key moments in this game before I jump over to the chat. Mike Evans again had a big 40-yard catch on 3rd and 10, set up 1st and goal from the 5. Then he draws a defensive pass interference 2 plays later, sets up Rachaad White for the 1-yard touchdown run on the very next play. Defensively, on 3rd and 1 from the Buccaneers 2-yard line, Ryan Neal got to Chuba Hubbard for a loss of 3, forcing the Panthers to settle for a field goal instead of tying the game at 7-7. You had Chris Godwin on the 19-yard end around for a touchdown, which proved to be the winning score. And Antoine Winfield Jr. gets an interception on 4th and 1 with 2 minutes and 21 seconds left, gets the offense the ball back with a chance to ice the game, kneel it out, which Rachaad White executes to perfection. On a 3rd and 1 play, Rachaad White breaks through the line, gets to the second level, busts off his longest run of the day of 30 yards, and then, even though he could have housed it, could have taken it all the way in, for a 100-yard rushing game and his second score. Yes, a 100-yard rushing game for the second week in a row, like I predicted. He goes down inside the 20, inbounds, knowing that the Panthers couldn't stop the clock and the Bucs were going to be able to kneel this one out and get out with the 21-18 victory. That kind of in the moment self-awareness by Rachaad White, absolutely fantastic. I'm going to jump over to the chat real quick. We got Gabriel in the chat saying, finally made it to my first live on a victory. Mike with a bunch of goat emojis. Gabriel, welcome to the live show. Appreciate you joining in. We got Ben Rosa in the chat, an everydayer for a long, long time. Don't think Bowles should be a head coach next season. Lastly, correct me, but Baker Mayfield is looking more and more like Jeff Garcia 2.0. This was a bad game for Baker Mayfield. It really was. I'm not going to sit here and make excuses for him. We can talk about the weather. I think that impacted the interception. It looked like the ball slipped out of his hands right as he was coming at the peak of getting ready to release it. It looks like it slides a little bit, but there were plenty of times when he left the ball short for open receivers. I started to wonder maybe if that ankle was affecting him a little bit more than they were letting on. I'm going to get into that a little bit later in the show, so I don't want to dive in too much on that specifically right now. But it was a bad game from Baker Mayfield, but the Bucs got the win. So you kind of you don't excuse it, you don't dismiss it, but it's not as glaring as it could have been. And you take a look at this Buccaneers team being able to step up without all those linebackers that I mentioned, without they still don't have their starting guard. Aaron Stinney penalized numerous times again for, I believe this is the third week in a row that he's had multiple penalties in one game. Want to continue to jump over to the chat before we move on. Danny in the chat says, so predictable offense, run first, 1 yard run, second 1 yard run, then try to convert on 3rd and 8. Not going to win the division like this. I don't think it was quite like that. If you go back and you watch, there were a lot of times that the Buccaneers were throwing on first down, not completing, and then running the ball on second down, only getting 1 yard here, 1 yard there, 2 yards here and there. But they appeared to be throwing more on first downs than we typically see. I'm going to have to go back in and dive in and rewatch, but that was the impression that I got in real time, was they were a little bit more open to throwing the ball early in these counts, even with Baker Mayfield struggling a little bit. Brent in the chat, how many more excuses are you going to give Baker? I'm not giving him any excuses. I just said I'm not giving him any excuses that he had a bad performance. At the same time, you look for reasons. I had somebody ask me one time, explain to me the difference between a reason and an excuse. And if it was that ankle, that's more of a reason than an excuse. But again, I'm going to get into that a little bit more coming up in just a little bit, because coming up, we do have my likes and my dislikes, and we are going to dive in to the GOAT of the Buccaneers. That and more is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. The holiday season is a time for joy, celebration, togetherness, and happiness. But the truth is, it's not those things for everyone. And even if it is, it can be overwhelming sometimes trying to make sure all of your friends and family are covered while you also carve out time for yourself. In my particular situation, I'm busy with jobs, busy with the show, busy with my son's hockey schedule, while still trying to plan time with the family during the holidays, and it can be extremely stressful. In any case, it's natural to experience some stress and anxiety during this time of the year. And if you already deal with that on a daily basis, even without the holidays, that can feel even more heavy. Therapy helps you learn coping mechanisms and helps you set boundaries for your time so you don't give so much of yourself away and get yourself lost. If you've been thinking about giving therapy a try, get it started with BetterHelp. BetterHelp is entirely online and designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. If you don't click with your therapist, then you can switch free of charge, no questions asked. Find the bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/lockedon. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. Everydayers, make sure you are coming back tomorrow, as David is going to have plenty of thoughts on this game. But Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe for the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. I'm sure they are going to have plenty to say about the way the college football playoff bracket happened to shake out. I'm not going to get into that on this episode. Let's just say I don't think they got it right. All right. Talking about my likes and my dislikes, and we're going to start off with what I liked, and it's Mike Evans. And I'm sure I'm not going to get any objections in the chat, but indulge me for a minute because I got to talk about this man for a little bit. 10 consecutive seasons to start a career with 1,000 yards or more, extending his own NFL record. And this year, he did it in 12 games on 60 receptions. That is 16.86 yards per catch. His career high is 17.7. And that was in 2018, which, ironically enough, was also his career high in yards with 1,524. That means that Mike Evans needs 512 yards to catch that mark, which is going to be tough, but not impossible. He needs to average 102.4 yards per game for the rest of the season to reach that mark. He also needs to average 1 touchdown per game to set a new career high of 15. He's also 1,000-yard season away from tying Jerry Rice's record for 11 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. Only one player in NFL history has more 1,000-yard seasons than Mike Evans, and that's Jerry Rice with 14. Evans legitimately might have 5 more years left in him at this level, and he could set the NFL's all-time record, replacing the NFL's all-time greatest receiver in the record books. You cannot tell me he isn't a Hall of Fame wide receiver. Absolutely no one can. Ross over at Locked On Saints can have his running joke of he doesn't know who Mike Evans is. There's absolutely no way even he can deny Mike Evans' rightful place with a bronze bust and a gold jacket in Canton, Ohio. There's no justification to keep him out. He's the model of consistency. He continues to do it quietly because nobody talks about him on a national stage. Nobody talks about him in the same breath as the Justin Jeffersons, the Jamar Chases, the Devontae Adamses, the Tyreek Hills. He shows up, he gets 1,000, and he goes home. Mike Evans is unquestionably the greatest offensive player in the history of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers franchise, and I will go so far as to say he is making a case for himself to be considered over the likes of Derek Brooks, Warren Sapp, Leroy Selman, Rondé Barber, and every other player that has suited up in red or orange as the greatest player, period, that this team has ever had. Mike Evans, if he retired tomorrow, is not only a Pro Football Hall of Famer, but he is of the rare class of wide receiver that should be inducted on the first ballot. This is a hill that I will scream from and that I will die on until the day that Mike Evans is retired and until the day that he qualifies to be considered for Hall of Fame induction. There has been nobody like Mike Evans to play for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers ever. He is the best on the field. He is incredible off the field and within the community. And I just wanted to take this time to basically say, Mike Evans, we salute you for all you have done for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers over the course of your career. Keep playing at a high level, because every single person that is involved in this show, that watches, that listens, that follows, appreciates what you've done. With all of that being said, let's get to my dislike. And it's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers beating themselves again. 5 penalties for 36 yards. Not bad, right? Wrong. There was one stretch that was just awful. Absolutely awful. You have Baker Mayfield find Trey Palmer for a first down on third down inside 2 minutes of the first half. It was a nice throw. It was a nice catch by Palmer at the sideline. But on that play, you had both a holding and an offensive pass interference away from the ball that negated the first down catch. Then that is immediately followed by a false start. So instead of first and 10 in Carolina territory under 2 minutes, with an opportunity to either get a touchdown or come away with at least a field goal, you end up facing 3rd and 19. You don't convert, you punt, and you give Carolina the opportunity to double up. Luckily, they didn't, but that was awful. Another way of the Bucs beating themselves, and I like him. Don't hear what I'm not saying, please. I like Trey Palmer. But Trey Palmer had 5 targets. 5. With J.C. Horn defending him. So you have the best corner on the Panthers covering the Bucs' number 3 receiver, and he's getting hyper-targeted. Chris Godwin had 3 targets in this game. No catches. He had a drop in the first half, didn't see his second target until the second half. Cade Otton, 0 targets. Payne Durham, 0 targets. I just got done talking about how great Mike Evans is, but he cannot be the only focal point of the offense. He can't be the only guy making plays. And all due respect to Palmer, he's not the guy that you should be hyper-targeting to start a game, especially a must-win game against a divisional opponent. Next, another week where you have a bad pass intended for Mike Evans getting picked off. And that was the one where it appeared on the replay that the ball started to slip out of Baker's hand. But that wasn't the only pass that Baker left short. I said I started to wonder about that ankle, and here's what I mean. I'm wondering if that ankle was bad enough that Baker could not step back and plant on that right foot and drive through the ball like he normally does. Baker, for all his faults, usually throws absolute bullets. He didn't have that in him today. And I wonder if that was the ankle playing into it a little bit. And I will say this, if that was the case, we saw him do this in Cleveland, battle through the injury, try to play through it. He's a tough dude. But if you're at the point where you can't step back on your plant foot and drive through a football, and you're leaving passes to open receivers short, you're doing more harm than good. And at that point, you need to set things aside and say, you know what? My foot, my ankle, my leg, I just don't have it today. And I'm not going to risk us losing this game because I can't get the ball where it needs to go like I normally do. So that ankle is going to be something to monitor again, because if Baker's doing that against the Atlanta Falcons, it's going to be bad news. They're facing another must win. He has to be better with his passes. Finally, every week, it's the same mental mistakes over and over and over again. At what point does it stop? You have to ask yourself, at what point does it stop? Or does it only end with the removal of Todd Bowles? We talked about it with the mental mistakes under Lovie Smith. We talked about it with the mental mistakes under Dirk Cutter. Those seemed to stop when Bruce Arians took over. Something's got to get fixed. Todd needs to look in the mirror, get this one figured out. You can't keep making the same mistakes over and over and over. That's the definition of insanity. And sometimes these Buccaneers seem like the kid that keeps slamming his head against the wall over and over and over just because it feels good when he stops. You have to figure out a way to stop beating yourself. Real quick, I want to jump over to the chat before we hit the next break. We got Danny says, was it Danny? Where'd it go? San Anto Gato says that's Canales not targeting Godwin. Could be. It absolutely 100% could be. Could be that Godwin's a little later in the progression. So when he is open, Baker's not looking his direction. It all depends on the play call, the progression of the receivers, how things go. But at this point, you have to start game planning to get Chris Godwin more involved. Real quick, let's see. I see some people talking about Mike Alstott. I can't figure out what the conversation is. I see Ben saying Alstott will be inducted soon. Hopefully, if you guys are talking about the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Alstott's not getting it. I'm going to tell you that right now. He's a Buccaneers legend. He's a Ring of Honor guy. He's not a Pro Football Hall of Famer. It stinks. He was one of my favorite players to watch growing up, but it will not happen. I can promise you that. I can say it with 100% certainty. Scott in the chat says Baker is Favre. He will have to be pulled from playing. You do know he played an entire year with his left shoulder falling out. Yeah, that's what I was referencing in Cleveland. You're 100% right. Someone has to take the reins and say, look, you need to sit down. It has to happen at this point. Again, hopefully the ankle's better next week, but it's something to keep an eye on. And if things are going the way they did against Carolina, and again, you wonder if weather played into that a little bit, but I do think there was more to that ankle than met the eye. But finally, we are going to pass out game balls. Start dropping your game balls into the chat. That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. If you want to check out the Buccaneers taking on the Atlanta Falcons this coming weekend, you can do so, or you can be like me and keep an eye on those concerts that you really want to go to and wait for those last-minute deals that Game Time knows everything about. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without any hidden fees. And Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of an event and even up to an hour after it starts. It is the place to find last-minute seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Wrapping things up here on a live post-game reaction episode of Locked On Bucs. And I see you guys dropping your game balls in the chat. Looks like we pretty much have a consensus. I do have to shout out Richard real quick before I start showing all the chats game balls. But Richard says game balls, offense, Mike Evans, defense, Mike Evans, special teams, Mike Evans. You guys know how I do this. I give out the top game ball, and then I give out the top game ball to the side of the ball that didn't get the top one. Game ball number one goes to Mike Evans. 12 targets, 7 receptions, 162 yards, the 75-yard touchdown, gets the 1,000 yards for the 10th consecutive season. What else needs to be said? Game ball number one, the golden game ball, as we will call it, goes to Mike Evans. So game ball number 2, going to the top defensive player, it's Antoine Winfield Jr. 8 tackles, led the team, had a sack, 2 tackles for loss, and a huge interception on 4th down, which I have to say, how on earth could the Panthers run the ball as effectively as they did all day long with Chuba Hubbard, only the second player this year to rush for over 100 yards against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? You run the ball on 1st down, you get a big chunk. You run the ball on 2nd down, you set up 3rd and 1. Okay, you run the play action. You hope the Bucs sell out on the run. Maybe you find a guy down the field like the Colts did with Mo Alley Cox on the 4th and 1 last week. Doesn't work out. Bryce Young has to throw the ball away. Then on 4th and 1, you're going to throw the ball again? Like, this is why the Panthers are the Panthers this year. This is why they're 1-11. If you run the ball, chances are you're going to get the 1st down and you're going to give your team an opportunity to at least get in field goal range. That was terrible play calling, but it was opportunistic and another all-pro caliber play by Antoine Winfield Jr. Game ball number 3, and I didn't see anyone mention this in the chat, but my 3rd game ball is going to go to J.J. Russell. This guy, to be put in this situation where you are having to fill in for the 2 starters plus the top backup in Servassier Dennis, who missed the game with an illness. When you are a practice squad guy that has to start, and then the only other inside linebacker playing in the game gets carted off the field. KJ Britt, the guy that had the communication helmet that was responsible for relaying the plays to the defense, he goes down. So not only are you getting a start after being promoted from the practice squad, now you're in charge of the communication for the defense in a must-win game against a division rival that just fired their head coach. And he performs the way that he did. Outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. A salute to J.J. Russell. And it would have been enough if he had just stepped in the way that he did. But to be second on the team with 7 tackles, plus a sack, plus a tackle for loss, absolutely fantastic. Shout out to J.J. Russell, because he's probably going to be one of the least talked about players of this game, and he deserves to be one of the most talked about players of this game. Finally, my last game ball goes to Rachaad White. He had a rough stretch there throughout the game, getting 1 yard here and 1 yard there. I talked about it a little bit, but then in the second half, he finally started to break out, had a nice cutback run that he bounced to the outside on 1st and 10, gained 11 yards, moved the sticks, finished with 84 yards on 20 carries, plus 3 receptions for 22 yards. So over 100 total yards yet again, plus got that opening touchdown on the 1 yard run. And I cannot stress enough the intelligence, the self-awareness, and the situational awareness that Rachaad White had on that 30-yard run on 3rd and 1 after the 2-minute warning to seal the game by going down in bounds and keeping the clock moving. He didn't get selfish. He didn't go for the stats. He made the smart play. Would have helped me more in fantasy if he was selfish, but they don't care about fantasy. They care about reality. And the reality is now that the Buccaneers are 5-7. They are now getting ready to face the Atlanta Falcons. If they win that game, the Bucs and Falcons are then both 6-7. Need a couple more things to kind of play out for the Bucs. They still kind of control their own destiny here. They need to win the rest of their divisional games. They need to get a win against the Packers or the Jaguars. But Atlanta is sitting there at 6-6 and 3-0 in the division. Need some divisional losses there if it comes down to that kind of tiebreaker. But it all starts this week when the Bucs have the opportunity to give the Falcons that first divisional loss. Going to jump over into the chat one last time. Scott in the chat says, Sydney gets a big bouncy ball like you get at the circus. Yeah, basically. Destined for greatness, says Game Ball JJ Russell. Love to see that. Corey in the chat said, loved explaining to my kids why White went down in bounds. It was a great play. Yep, absolutely. Ben gave Rachaad White a game ball for his selfless play. And who else do we have in here? Yeah, a lot of everybody saying Mike, of course. That is a no-brainer. Richard also in the chat said, Ryan Neal looked better as a linebacker. Kinda. It does help when he's not blowing coverages. He was making tackles. He had that nice tackle for loss. It also does not put him under the magnifying glass when he blows coverages and gives up huge chunk plays. So that is a plus. Did have Rich in the chat saying Tepper did Frank dirty. I agree. David Tepper's not a great owner, but maybe there's a method to the madness, and 5 years from now, it's going to pan out. It's just going through some of these speed bumps early on, but overall, my opinion of David Tepper is not a high one. Finally, Larry in the chat says, love seeing the offense finishing the game. Absolutely, 100%. All right, coming up tomorrow, David is going to have his reaction to this game. The Buccaneers get a big divisional win, and I want to appreciate each and every one of you for coming through on the live show, getting engaged in the chat. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you want to be like some of those in the live chat that are a Locked On Bucs insider, I did see Mike earlier in the chat saying that he couldn't watch the game, so he appreciated all the updates that he was getting through being a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to join today. Check out everything that I'm doing over at BucsNation.com and follow everything on Twitter at LockedOnBucs and at @JYarcho_Bucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy. Finally, fire the cannons. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.